everyone. Welcome to your Swedenborgian community online, your spiritual connection, no matter what your faith. We are grounded in a mystical Christianity that believes there are many ways to connect with divinity, many ways to connect with God, uplifting life where we can in our own spirits and others, and knowing that all goodness, all beauty, love, wisdom, pretty much everything that's positive, that works for the universe comes from the higher power, comes from divinity. But we each take that in our own way. We may call God the universe, may call God Lord, Christ, Allah, but let's be there for each other in our own walks instead of forcing our personal journeys onto others. So today we are talking about how we should uncover our light and let it shine. And this is a clear reference to the Matthew scriptures where Jesus tells us to not cover our light with a bowl or a bushel or what have you, but to let it shine. That we should be like a city on a hill, full of beauty, out for people to see, to reflect on, and to learn from. And I think that is a wonderful message today, when often, yes, we're encouraged to show off in a way or what have you, but the scripture from Matthew says, well, let yourself shine by doing good for others in your world, so that the world and those who see you worship God. They glorify God by being inspired by your good deeds. Now, there's a little trickiness there, right? Because there's also this idea of humility in Scripture. And how do we lean into doing good externally and remove the ego from it? Well, we'll get into that in a minute. But I want to thank you for joining us today. Be sure to subscribe and follow us. We're on YouTube, many podcasting apps, Facebook, Instagram, and on. So please continue to connect with us, and also a special greetings to those of you in the live chatzy. Nice to connect with you as always in our small group. We have another small group starting that we've adopted from another format. They were in a class together and they wanted a way to connect, and so there's people who connect with that group as well via Zoom. And if you're interested in either one of our small groups or other chats in many different formats, I can start by listing a few, but you probably don't want to hear it. Just reach out, because there's many ways to connect and hear each other and empower each other to shine our light. And with that, let us listen to today's message. So we get such a message of positivity from Christ today in our reading from Matthew, from the Christian New Testament, saying that we're the light of the world and we should let it shine before others. It beams of love and empowerment coming from the divine Christ, or even just a sage if you view Jesus that way, to empower others, not just himself. Indeed, we often relate Christ and God to light, and yet here's God saying, you're the light of the world as well, which we'll explore a little more in a minute. But I think it's that positivity and love that's behind why we sing this little light of mine so often with our children, in this church, of course, but throughout the world in many contexts, because we see the light in our kids. And we want them to lean into it. We're just so happy they're as perfect as they are. And we know that often, at least in our own lives, that light can feel like it might diminish a little bit as we layer on trauma and hurts, what we believe to be the realities of our world. And so we want to encourage our kids to shine. And I don't think it's a coincidence that we connect light with our kids. In fact, the other kind of clear message of positivity that Christ often uplifted was to uplift children, to let them come to him, and that we as adults have to become like children
to enter heaven. It's curious to think about what that might mean, that we must become like children to enter heaven. Not often uplifted as the stipulation for the afterlife. Many traditions say, well, you have to be Christian, you have to be Muslim, you have to be etc. To go to heaven. But here's Christ saying you have to become like a child. It's interesting in Emanuel Swedenborg's explorations and his writings and spiritual visions, he believed even if we don't quite make it to that kind of spiritual childhood in this life, we have some opportunity in the next. So I won't lose heart from that saying. And indeed, the Bible's emphasis on humility in the face of uplifting our light and uplifting us as children also confuses. It tends to dampen the message for me. Because in my life, it's hard enough to become like a child and let my light shine, let alone to be humble about it, to be in the mode of Christ. How do you hold both? Well, I think that the rest of the reading from Matthew clears this up a little bit. It says that they will see your good deeds and glorify your Father in heaven because of them. They will see the goodness in your spirit and life and glorify God. So in a way, the crux of the message is not just doing good deeds, but why? The crux of it is so that others may uplift goodness and divinity themselves. So we're still tasked on pulling back on our vaingloriousness, our unchildlikeness. Hopefully, we continue to have that opportunity in the next life as we grow and change. But we're also invited to lean in to the glory of God within and around us, to acknowledge the source of our light, the sunrise of our hearts. It's easy to kind of put on a show. That's what we often do throughout our lives. In not my last job, but my job out of college, I worked in financial research, and I found it harder and harder to fake being happy in that work. It just wasn't, it was right for me in a certain way. I love researching, I love doing financial analysis even, I love the math. But sometimes the environment was really tough, really brutal on certain individuals. Because, we can work in places that are bullying. We can work in places that try to dampen our light. And I found it so hard to fake it. And I had no reason to do anything. I did my work, but I found it hard to even speak. I had a hard time forming a sentence when I wasn't forced to. Why was that? I had no reason to live. The childlike spark in my heart had diminished so much that I didn't care. I still felt like I cared about other people, but why do I need to do anything? Why get up out of bed in the morning? It's interesting because I wasn't clinically depressed. I never actually had that hard a time getting out of bed. I know many people have it much tougher. So I want to acknowledge that. But it was when I was at my lowest point that God, in a way, touched me and inspired me to believe that there's more going on and that there was hope for the child and me and other people. In a way, God is asking us when we put this idea to let our light shine and be like a child together, to let it shine, let ourselves shine like a child within and without. A kid doesn't do things just for the glory for themselves. They're not faking it when they're happy. They're being good when they're being good most of the time. I mean, we've met 2-year-olds, and 5-year-olds, and 10-year-olds, but most of the time, there's an element of selfishness we carry from an early age. And so in a way, this call to be like a child is almost like a call to be a higher child. In fact, in our scriptures, in the Bible and in other world traditions, that's often what God is described as, a divine child. Funny to think about God as a child. But there's something about that I think we can relate to, even in the strictest, most dogmatic versions of Christianity. Our tradition, at least at its base, we still see God as a child. We celebrate it through the major depiction that was up there until recently. We talk about God being this newborn for what we call the happiest time of the year. And I think there's a reason for that. There's an image of innocence, of love and light in a child. It's not because God is young, but God is young in spirit, the youngest. How else can we say that the point of spirituality is to grow younger within, to be young at heart? We receive our life from somewhere. It's God. We emulate God when we're at our best. And Jesus says this is how we're made. We're made to do that forever. We're born as a childlike light, innocent, loving, open. And sometimes the constructs that kind of hide that light begin early on. We get hurt. We're not held perfectly. And so we build defenses. We don't trust anymore. We don't trust others. We don't trust ourselves. And we often don't trust God. And we build those defenses. And I think it can start even before we're kids. There's research nowadays into generational trauma and the impact of our genetics on our propensities for bad habits. I mean, it's amazing. But even if we're going to talk about genetics, we know in recent science that can change. Our gene expression can change with just a change of attitude, funny enough. Our whole body is transformed as we lean into the childlikeness that God calls us to. One of play, of innocence, of accepting, often even the hurtful things, while still being willing to work toward change and goodness. In fact, it often takes that kind of receptivity, the peace of a child, to feel like we can really do something. Because, I know it's true for myself. I get so caught up in the tragedy and the hurt. It's like it almost stops me from doing anything about it. It speaks to other traditions as well, like Buddhism and like lines of Taoism and others, that say we have to open ourselves and accept, like a child does, to truly be impactful in this world and to allow ourselves to change. Because that's what Christ's message is often about. Reformation of heart, of spirit, and life. But it's not easy. We call these things ourselves, the things that we're tasked with changing. The selfish modalities of our hearts and spirits are us. It's often we sit in that seat of whatever is going on as, well, this is me. What do you mean? And in fact, often we don't reflect on it. Like, this doesn't need to change. This is me. Maybe these other things that I do need to change, but what about this? In a way, that's what Christ is asking. What about that? Be willing to become like a child again, to turn. Being open to new life. Our scriptures tell us to be like a town on a hill. And a town on a hill shines its light for others. It opens itself to others. Like a child, I think a beatific town just displays love, in a sense, just beauty, and openness. But still, the more we layer on the scripture, almost the more confusing it can get. And so I think we're tasked with reflecting on the images of scripture and see how they relate. How does an open town, a beautiful town on the hill shining for others, speak to you of change from how you are today? How we are as a group? How do we balance being open and being childlike and leaning into goodness with not being vainglorious? How do we separate ego from goodness? It's hard. And I think that's where the benefit of our tradition and many religions come in. God tells us that isn't you. You might have done something beautifully. It's not you. You are beautiful. Your spirit, your life. That's me. I am the divine child. I am the one all of you are made in an image of, because I am infinite and we're finite. It might seem oppressive at first, but in a way it's enabling. Because then we realize the source of our life is infinite, is always working to change us, to transform our lives, and is more concerned about it than we could ever be, because God loves us so much and finds his life in fruition through us. As Swedenborg believed, the purpose of the universe was to have an infinitely growing kingdom of children of God, many different stripes and beliefs. So that's our task. It's not easy. We carry hurt. We carry pain. And thankfully, we're given spiritual practices in this tradition and others that help us lean into it. Meditation, I think, helps quite a bit. Being willing to start from a place of peace can transform almost every moment of our lives. We often start out here, even in our minds, kind of in an external space. But we're tasked with a prayerful attitude of looking for ways to uplifting the child within and in others. Seeing the beauty of the children, even in what some may call the not beauty in ourselves, our friends, our family. And feeling that inspiration that we are divinely inspired and empowered to transform the world around and within us. Now let us close our eyes for a moment, opening our hands, taking a few deep breaths, and then allowing our breaths to just do as they will, but paying attention to them, which is often a helpful practice to start at peace. Interestingly, Swedenborg and Taoism agree that we often should just accept the good and the bad, knowing that, in a sense, the bad serves a purpose, but leaning into goodness. So for a moment, allow yourself to accept that judgmental voice within, whether directed towards yourself or others, but noticing that you don't have to identify with it. Accept the pain that you might feel in your body, in your spirit. Allowing that remembrance of breath, of the present moment, to center you on the child within, the light and flame of your spirit.
wax on the table, and tools at his ankles. Forged in the fire, letters in iron, the scar-bearing rider. And up with the sunrise, he unveils his eyes, the world at his side. In the sea of strangers, she searches among them, seeing his face in everyone beside her. In the sea of performers, she searches among them for the world rider. He put on her shoes for her, unbraided her hair, and walked her down to the fair. In the heat of the spotlight, blue shadows on white, she was a sight. And higher the sun rose, he gave her water from a garden hose, and kissed her wet nose. In the sea of strangers, she searches among them, seeing his face in everyone beside her. In the sea of performers, she searches among them for the wild rider. He took off her shoes for her, and he braided her hair. Another day at the fair. He watched her round ribs rise like a barrel of wine, deep, heavy sighs. He hung up her saddle, finished the handle, and blew out the candle. Asleep in the stable, wax on the table, and tools at his ankles. He's the wild rider, for the wild rider.
What beautiful music from Justine Lucas. It's so nice to have such grand sounds for our meditative reflection times. So if you have music, if you have something you want to share, it doesn't have to be music, with the online community, through the online community, reach out to me at minister@Swedenborgiancommunity.org, and I will do my best to uplift it, to use it to empower others, giving you credit. So thank you, Justine. Thank you, the other musicians that we often highlight here that have personally, offered their music and are willing to share for the upliftment, for the enlightenment of others. And often the music in our lives goes a far way to uplift us, to inspire that kindling. In fact, sometimes in my life, the only thing that really has connected in such a deep way is music or another piece of art, a movie or something. And when we find religion and spirituality that inspires us as well, we can even take that further with the things that inspired us before, or maybe it's always been a mix for you. And I think that's the most beautiful thing, because then you have a diversity of life from maybe everything around you. You just see inspiration in the image here, in life there. And so, along the vein of uncovering our light and letting it shine, let's reflect on the ways that we can often get dampened by our hurtful constructs. It's not always something that we build to defend ourselves. Sometimes it's just something that we build because we want our way in certain situations, certain habits, certain perspectives and motives. And in fact, often that intentionality is the thing that we need to lift up to God from a place of peace and prayer to help transform it into what Christ offers us today, what God, Allah, whatever you call your higher power, offers us in every moment, which is a renewed spirit of openness and love, of a willingness to support others where they're at instead of forcing our label or our ideas onto them. It's interesting because in a lot of traditions, including Christianity and Judaism, but also Hinduism and Taoism, we see this idea that we should love others as ourselves. Not only that, but we should see them as ourselves. I like coupling the two as the Tao does, but also in a way as Jesus highlights, because that gives me a renewed perspective of, wow, I'm inspired by the same being as they are. Like, the thing that gives me consciousness and life and love is the same as what gives them all that they have going for them. Even the things that we often misuse for hurtfulness, that's empowered by divinity in its own way. But as the scriptures tell us, the more we acknowledge where that empowerment comes from, the divine Holy One within and around us, the more we can be empowered by it, because then we start to allow our ego to fall away, and we allow ourselves to receive that childlike wonder of being a child of God, of being connected to the divine child within. And it's a process. It's a process of many steps. Often it takes finding good spiritual practices and what have you, as we've explored earlier. But I encourage you to continue it. I think you're probably further than you think. I know often in my own life it can feel like I'm on a treadmill or something, not able to grow in the ways that I might like. But actually, it's when we accept even those moments that we start to see progress in ways we may never expect. And it's interesting that acceptance of how things are playing out just often plays a big role, at least in my spiritual journey. It's when I stop trying to fight everything. I'm still working towards transformation, but I'm taking a more peaceful lens to anything, to everything. It's what Christ inspires us to do. It's what traditions like Taoism and Buddhism encourage again and again, which is just a pure acceptance of the moment and even the worst that may happen, which allows for a greater transformation of spirit and heart. And in a way, if you think about it, what brings you the most sorrow and hurt? It's often that turmoil of, you're not liking how it's happening, you're judging, anxious about the future, anxious about the past. You say, well, I'm going to be judged here, and they're going to criticize me there, no one's going to like me or something. But we can step away from that. That's what these traditions tell us. And sometimes it's other things, like I'm being hurtful and I don't want to, or maybe we don't care, right? But we still feel like we're somewhat hollow and anxious and hurting in another way. Well, I think those different aspects of ourselves are more closely connected than we often think, and so we have to work on this and this and this and this and this to see progress over in that place that we think is like the epitome of growth. It takes a village of self in our growth, and it often also takes a village of community. So let us continue to connect in community and the Swedenborgian community online and many different places, many different formats. Reach out to us. We want to connect with you. We have a new small group starting that uses Zoom. They are being ported from a class at the Swedenborgian Seminary into the Swedenborgian Community Online umbrella. So if you want to join one of our small groups or just get into an email chain or something, please reach out. And also, I think many of you have gifts that this community could really use to empower others. So if you want to share your voice, you want to share your music as many of these gracious musicians have, please reach out to me, reach out to the community. If you have arts, if you want to help with technical things, reach out and we'll connect with you as we go along. It's a very small operation, and this is a part-time ministry for me, so the more help we have, the more we can do as a whole. And so reach out if you feel inspired to help in that way. We also often really celebrate giving, money-wise, otherwise here, so don't feel shy about that either, because we are empowered by the community. And so with that, let us turn to a place of openness and reflection. We don't always take the time to open that meditation app and say, play. So let us listen to a song from the Turleys, and taking this time to reflect on our breathing, come into the moment, accepting what is, trying to let go of the insistent thinking, noticing our affections, our emotions, but coming back to the center of acceptance and peace, of light that God offers us from His divinity in every single moment. That's it for us today, folks. Know that when you look around you, the people you see, the things you see are empowered, inspired by the loving divinity that brings you consciousness, that allows for your insight and reflection, and that is insight and reflection in its divine sense. So every finite incarnation receives, in conjunction with that God, what it gets, what it pulls forward, and what it allows to manifest in its own life and its own consciousness. So just know that you are not as isolated as you may think you are. You are closer to others than you can imagine. And so see them as yourself. See that light within them. Hope to help them to uncover that light as you can. Not forcing your ideas onto them necessarily, although often sharing some of the things that work for us helps. But what have we learned in our lives when we interact with others and try too hard to get them to believe something? It doesn't really work out. So instead, let us meet people where they are, starting to care about them as if they are us, because in a sense they are. They're empowered by the same divinity, limited by the same type of spiritual and material constructs. And so why not see them as yourself and love them as yourself, as Christ asks us to do, and as traditions like the Tao Te Ching, the Tao, help us to accept and lean into in our own walks. And with that, go forth knowing you are loved by the shining divine child within and around you, and use that empowerment to show others that they're loved as well. Bye.